The rain hammered against the windows of Marcus Chen's apartment in downtown Seattle, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below into abstract patterns of gold and silver. It was the kind of February evening that made people grateful for warm spaces and good company, which was exactly what the five friends had gathered to enjoy. Marcus, a software engineer at Amazon, had invited his college friends over for what had become their monthly tradition: board games, craft beer, and catching up on life in the ever-evolving tech hub of the Pacific Northwest. "This weather is absolutely miserable," complained Jessica Walsh, shaking water from her umbrella as she entered the modern loft apartment. She worked as a curator at the Seattle Art Museum and had an eye for detail that made her unbeatable at most games. Behind her, David Reeves stomped his boots on the mat, his construction worker's frame filling the doorway. Sarah Kim, a nurse at Harborview Medical Center, helped him with his coat, while Thomas Novak, a history professor at the University of Washington, was already examining Marcus's extensive board game collection. "I found something interesting at Pike Place Market today," Marcus announced, producing a wooden box from his kitchen counter. The box was old, its surface worn smooth by countless hands, with intricate carvings that seemed vaguely Celtic in origin. "The vendor said it's from the 1920s. It's supposed to be some kind of vintage puzzle." Thomas's eyes lit up with academic interest as he examined the box. "These markings are fascinating. They're not quite Celtic, more like a fusion of different European styles. Where did the vendor say it came from?" He wasn't sure. Said it was part of an estate sale from one of those old mansions in Capitol Hill. The original owner was apparently some bootlegger during Prohibition. Marcus opened the box carefully, revealing hundreds of wooden pieces, each intricately carved and stained in various shades of brown and amber. The friends gathered around Marcus's large dining table, the Seattle skyline twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. They began sorting the pieces, Jessica naturally taking charge of organizing them by color and pattern. The puzzle was more complex than any they'd encountered before. There was no picture to guide them, only the pieces themselves and their intuition. "This is actually kind of therapeutic," Sarah said, fitting two pieces together with a satisfying click. "After 12 hours in the emergency room, I needed something mindless." David laughed, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate pieces. "Mindless. I've been staring at these edges for 10 minutes, and I can't figure out where anything goes." As the evening progressed and empty beer bottles accumulated on the side table, the puzzle began to take shape. It wasn't a picture at all, but rather what appeared to be a map of Seattle from the 1920s, complete with street names and landmarks, many of which no longer existed. The Space Needle was notably absent, of course, and the waterfront looked completely different. "This is incredible," Thomas muttered, leaning closer to examine the emerging map. "This shows the old Hooverville that was here during the Depression. And look, there's the original Skid Road before it became Yesler Way." It was nearly midnight when they placed the final piece. The completed puzzle was beautiful in its craftsmanship, but as they admired their work, Jessica noticed something odd. "There's writing here," she said, pointing to what they had assumed were decorative borders. The text was tiny, requiring Marcus to fetch a magnifying glass from his desk. Thomas, with his knowledge of historical documents, began to read aloud. "The truth about the Carlisle murders lies beneath where the first cornerstone was placed. February 28th, 1925. Those who seek justice must be prepared to pay its price." A silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of rain against glass. "The Carlisle murders?" Sarah asked. "What's that about?" Thomas was already on his phone, searching historical databases. "Here it is. February 28th, 1925. 5 members of the Carlisle family were found murdered in their mansion on Capitol Hill. The case was never solved. The father, William Carlisle, was a prominent businessman with alleged ties to bootlegging operations. The murders were particularly brutal, and the police suspected it was a professional hit related to territorial disputes during Prohibition. That's exactly 100 years ago this month, Marcus calculated quickly. That can't be a coincidence. David stood up, stretching. Okay, this is getting a bit too weird for me. It's probably just some elaborate marketing thing, right? Like those escape room puzzles? But Jessica was studying the map more carefully. I don't think so. Look at this mark here. She pointed to a small symbol on the map near what would now be Pioneer Square. That's where the first building in Seattle was constructed. The cornerstone would be currently under the Seattle Underground Tour area, Thomas finished. The city was rebuilt on top of the old one after the Great Fire of 1889. The friends exchanged glances, a mixture of excitement and apprehension on their faces. Marcus was the first to voice what they were all thinking. We should check it out. Tomorrow's Saturday. We could take the underground tour and see if there's actually anything there. Sarah looked skeptical. You want to go treasure hunting based on a 100-year-old puzzle? What if it's dangerous? Or illegal? David added, though his tone suggested he was already warming to the idea. We'll just look, Jessica said, her curator's instincts fully engaged. If there's something historically significant there, it should be properly documented and preserved. We're not talking about breaking any laws, just following a historical mystery. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. As a historian, I have to say this is an incredible opportunity. If this puzzle is authentic, and there really is something hidden related to the Carlisle murders, it could be a significant historical discovery. They agreed to meet the next morning at Pike Place Market and take the tour together. As the friends prepared to leave, Marcus carefully photographed the completed puzzle from multiple angles. Something made him want to preserve the image, a nagging feeling that they might need it later. David was putting on his coat when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. That's weird. I just got a text from an unknown number. He showed them the screen. It read simply, "Stay away from the past." Some puzzles are meant to remain unsolved. The others checked their phones. One by one, they had all received the same message. The timestamp showed it had been sent the moment they completed the puzzle. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she looked at her phone. How could anyone know we just finished it? No one else even knows we have this puzzle. Marcus went to his window and looked down at the street below. Rain continued to fall, and the streetlights created pools of yellow light on the wet pavement. Was it his imagination? Or was there someone standing in the shadow of the building across the street, looking up at his apartment? When he blinked, the figure was gone. Maybe we shouldn't do this, Sarah said quietly. That message, it feels like a threat. But Thomas was already lost in the mystery. Think about it, though. If someone's trying to scare us off, it means there's something real to find. The Carlisle murders were one of Seattle's greatest unsolved mysteries. 5 people, including 2 children, murdered in cold blood. If we could help solve that case, even a century later, wouldn't we owe it to them? Jessica nodded slowly. And to history. Whatever's hidden has been waiting for 100 years. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out. As the friends departed into the rainy Seattle night, none of them noticed the figure that detached itself from the shadows and followed David to his truck. None of them saw the black sedan that pulled out behind Sarah's Honda as she drove home to Ballard. And certainly none of them could have known that by completing that antique puzzle, they had set in motion events that had been waiting a century to unfold, events that would test their friendship, their courage, and ultimately, their survival. The next morning brought one of those rare, clear February days in Seattle where Mount Rainier stood majestically visible against a crystal blue sky. The 5 friends met at Pike Place Market as planned, though the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Sarah had bags under her eyes from a sleepless night, and David kept checking over his shoulder as they walked through the market crowds. The underground tour entrance was just a few blocks away, and they had booked spots on the 11 a.m. tour. I did more research last night, Thomas said as they walked past the famous fish-throwing vendors. The Carlisle mansion was demolished in 1950, but I found the original police reports from 1925. They're public record now. Oh, he pulled out his tablet, showing them scanned documents. William Carlisle wasn't just a bootlegger. He was supposedly keeping detailed records of corruption in city government, planning to expose several prominent figures who were taking bribes from criminal organizations. So someone killed his entire family to keep him quiet? Jessica asked, horrified. That's one theory, but the police never found his supposed evidence. They searched the house, his business properties, everything. Nothing turned up. Thomas scrolled through more documents. But look at this. 3 days before the murders, Carlyle was seen at the construction site for what would become the Smith Tower's underground foundations. He was carrying a metal box. Marcus studied the historical photos on Thomas's tablet. And the cornerstone reference in the puzzle. That could be the Smith Tower. It was completed in 1914, but they were still doing underground work in the 20s for the Speakeasy tunnels. They reached the underground tour entrance, joining a group of about 20 tourists. Their guide was a cheerful woman named Beth, who launched into the well-rehearsed history of Seattle's underground city. As they descended into the subterranean passages, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sounds of the modern city above faded to a distant hum. The tour wound through the dimly lit corridors, past old storefronts and forgotten basements. Beth explained how the city had been rebuilt 1 story higher after the Great Fire, leaving these passages as a ghostly reminder of old Seattle. The friends tried to pay attention to the historical commentary while simultaneously looking for anything that might relate to their puzzle. It was Jessica who noticed it first, a symbol carved into a brick wall that matched one from the puzzle's border. It was partially obscured by decades of grime, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. She discreetly pointed it out to the others, while Beth was distracted with other tourists' questions. "We need to come back without the tour," David whispered. "Tonight, maybe." Marcus shook his head. "Breaking into the underground? That's actually illegal. These tours are the only legal access." But fate intervened in an unexpected way. As the tour was concluding, Beth announced that the tour company was looking for volunteers for their historical preservation project that evening. "We're documenting and cleaning some of the less visited sections," she explained. "If anyone's interested in Seattle history and doesn't mind getting dirty, we could use the help." The 5 friends immediately volunteered. Beth seemed pleased to have eager helpers and told them to return at 8 p.m. with work clothes and flashlights. As they emerged back into the daylight, Sarah's phone rang. It was the hospital. They needed her for an emergency shift. "Go," Jessica told her. "We'll fill you in on whatever we find." But Sarah looked troubled. "Be careful. I have a bad feeling about this. That text last night. Someone knows what we're doing." After Sarah left for the hospital, the remaining 4 killed time at the Seattle Public Library, where Thomas accessed more historical records. They discovered that William Carlyle had been a meticulous record keeper, and his business ledgers, at least the official ones, were archived there. Marcus used his software skills to digitize and analyze the ledgers quickly, looking for patterns or hidden messages. "Here," Marcus said suddenly, pointing at his laptop screen. "These entries from February 1925, they look like normal business transactions, but the amounts form a pattern. If you convert them to letters using a simple substitution cipher," he typed rapidly, "it spells out truth below foundation stone protected by 4 keys. 4 keys? David asked. "What 4 keys? Jessica was examining photos of the puzzle on her phone. "Look at the corner pieces of our puzzle. Each one has a different symbol. A raven, a fish, a tree, and a mountain. Those are all Seattle symbols. The raven for the Native American heritage, the fish for Pike Place, the tree for the lumber industry, and the mountain for Rainier." "But what does that mean?" David asked, frustrated. Thomas's eyes widened with realization. "The underground has 4 main entrance points from the original city. Each one was controlled by a different business consortium in the 1920s. If Carlyle hid something down there, he might have created a system where you'd need access or knowledge from all 4 points to find it." That evening, they returned to the underground tour entrance, dressed in old clothes. Beth was there with 2 other volunteers, college students who seemed more interested in each other than in historical preservation. She led them to a section of the underground that wasn't part of the regular tour, giving them brushes and cleaning supplies. "This area hasn't been properly catalogued in decades," Beth explained. "We're trying to document everything before the city does renovation work next year. Just be careful. Some of these passages are unstable." As soon as Beth left them to their work, the friends began searching for the symbols from the puzzle. David's construction experience proved invaluable as he identified which walls were original and which were later additions. They worked their way deeper into the passages, their flashlights creating dancing shadows on the old brick walls. It was nearly midnight when they found it, a small chamber that had been walled off and forgotten. The entrance was hidden behind what looked like a solid wall, but David noticed that the mortar was different, newer than the surrounding brickwork. Using his pocket knife, he was able to loosen several bricks, revealing a narrow passage. Inside, their flashlights illuminated a small room with stone walls. In the center was a metal box, exactly as Thomas had described from the police reports. But it was secured with 4 separate locks, each marked with one of the symbols from the puzzle corners. Marcus examined the locks closely. "These are puzzle locks, not key locks. Each one requires a specific combination or sequence to open." "How are we supposed to figure that out?" David asked. Jessica was studying the walls of the chamber. "There are inscriptions here. They're faint, but I can make them out." She began reading. "The raven flies at midnight. The fish swims upstream twice. The tree grows 7 rings. The mountain stands at 47. "It's a riddle," Thomas said excitedly. "Each line must correspond to one of the locks." They spent the next hour working on the puzzle locks, with Marcus applying his problem-solving skills and Jessica her eye for detail. The raven lock opened with a combination that corresponded to midnight on a clock face. The fish lock required a back-and-forth motion. The tree lock had 7 rotating rings that needed to be aligned. The mountain lock opened at position 47, which Thomas recognized as the latitude of Seattle. When the final lock clicked open, they held their breath as David lifted the lid of the metal box. Inside the metal box lay several oilcloth-wrapped packages, remarkably well preserved despite the century that had passed. With trembling hands, Thomas carefully unwrapped the first package, revealing a leather-bound journal filled with William Carlyle's meticulous handwriting. The second package contained photographs, dozens of them, showing prominent Seattle citizens from the 1920s in compromising positions, meeting with known criminals, exchanging envelopes, and participating in what appeared to be elaborate bootlegging operations. The third package held financial documents, bank records, and signed confessions that implicated half of Seattle's political establishment in a web of corruption that reached from the police department to the mayor's office. "This is incredible," Thomas whispered, carefully turning the journal pages. Carlyle documented everything: names, dates, amounts, even conversations. He was building a case that would have destroyed the entire power structure of 1920s Seattle. Jessica was examining the photographs with her curator's eye. "These are original prints. The quality is exceptional for the era. And look at this one." She held up a photo showing 3 men in expensive suits standing over what appeared to be a body. "That's Mayor Edwards, Police Chief Morrison, and, oh my God, that's James Rothschild, the founder of Rothschild Industries." David looked confused. "Rothschild Industries? They're still around. They own half the commercial real estate in Seattle." "Exactly," Marcus said, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "And the current CEO is James Rothschild IV, the great-grandson of the man in that photo. If this gets out—" A sound from the passage behind them made them all freeze. Footsteps were approaching, multiple sets, moving with purpose. David quickly moved to the entrance, peering out into the darkness. "Someone's coming! We need to get out of here." But before they could move, bright LED lights flooded the chamber, temporarily blinding them. When their vision cleared, they found themselves facing 3 men in dark suits. The man in the center was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed familiar from newspaper photos and society pages. Mr. Rothschild, Thomas said, recognizing him immediately. James Rothschild IV stood before them, flanked by two men who were obviously private security. Professor Novak, Ms. Walsh, Mr. Chen, Mr. Reeves, Rothschild said, naming each of them in turn. I must admit, I'm impressed. My family has been looking for this cash for 100 years. We knew Carlyle had hidden evidence somewhere, but the old bastard took the secret to his grave, or so we thought. You killed them, Jessica said, her voice shaking with anger. Your family murdered the Carlyles, including 2 innocent children. Rothschild's expression didn't change. My great-grandfather did what was necessary to protect not just our family, but dozens of others who had built this city. Carlyle was an idealist who didn't understand that sometimes corruption is just another word for how things actually get done. He would have destroyed everything, ruined countless lives, all for his naive notion of justice. So you've been watching us since we found the puzzle, Marcus said, pieces falling into place. The text messages were from you. We've been watching that puzzle for decades, Rothschild admitted. It appeared in estate sales 3 times over the years, and each time we acquired it, only to have it mysteriously disappear and resurface later. When it appeared at Pike Place Market last week, we thought we had finally secured it. Imagine our surprise when the vendor sold it before our representative arrived. We've been monitoring Mr. Chen's apartment ever since. David stepped forward aggressively, but the security men shifted their positions, warning him back. What do you want? He demanded. Simple. You're going to give us everything in that box, and you're going to forget this ever happened. In return, you'll find your lives becoming remarkably comfortable. Mr. Chen, that startup idea you've been developing, fully funded. Ms. Walsh, the museum has been considering you for chief curator, hasn't it? Professor Novak, I believe you're up for tenure. And Mr. Reeves, your construction company could certainly use some major contracts. You're trying to bribe us? Thomas asked incredulously. I'm offering you a choice, Rothschild corrected. Take the offer and prosper, or refuse and face the consequences. And before you consider being heroes, think about Ms. Kim. Such a dedicated nurse. It would be tragic if something were to happen during one of those late-night shifts at the hospital. The threat against Sarah changed everything. The friends exchanged glances, seeing the same conflict in each other's eyes. Jessica was the first to speak. We need time to discuss this. You have 5 minutes, Rothschild said, gesturing for his men to step back slightly. The 4 friends huddled together, whispering urgently. We can't let them threaten Sarah, David said immediately. But if we give them the evidence, the Carlyle family never gets justice, Thomas argued. Those children deserve better. Marcus was thinking rapidly, his mind working through possibilities like code. What if we don't have to choose? He whispered. I photographed everything while you were all looking at the documents. It's all uploaded to my cloud storage. We could give them the originals but still have copies. They'll know, Jessica said. People like Rothschild don't leave loose ends. Not if we're smart about it, Marcus insisted. We give them what they want now, then release everything anonymously later. WikiLeaks, major newspapers, social media, everywhere at once. By the time they realize it, it'll be too late to stop. Thomas looked torn. The historical value of these originals is less important than our lives, David finished firmly. Marcus is right. We play along now, protect ourselves and Sarah, then find a way to get justice later. They broke their huddle and faced Rothschild. We'll take your deal, Jessica said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. Rothschild smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Excellent choice. However, to ensure your continued cooperation, we'll need some insurance. He produced a tablet. You're each going to sign a confession stating that you broke into the underground illegally, vandalized historical property, and stole artifacts. The documents will be dated and include evidence that would destroy your careers and land you in federal prison. As long as you keep quiet, these confessions stay locked away. Break our agreement, and they go directly to the FBI. The friends had no choice. One by one, they signed the digital documents, each signature another bar in their cage. Rothschild's men collected everything from the metal box, handling the century-old evidence with latex gloves. "Oh, and Mr. Chen," Rothschild added as they prepared to leave, "will be monitoring your digital footprint very carefully. Any attempt to share what you may or may not have photographed would be inadvisable. Our technical capabilities are quite sophisticated." Now, after Rothschild and his men left, the four friends stood in the underground chamber in stunned silence. The weight of what had just happened, of the choice they'd been forced to make, settled over them like a shroud. They made their way back to the surface in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about justice, survival, and the price of truth. When they emerged into the Seattle night, the city looked different somehow. The gleaming skyscrapers, the bustling late-night establishments, the very foundations of the city itself, all of it built on secrets and blood, corruption and compromise. They split up without much discussion, each heading home to process what had happened. Marcus sat in his apartment, staring at his laptop screen where the photographed documents were stored. Rothschild's threat echoed in his mind, but so did the images of the Carlisle children from the police reports. 5 lives ended to protect a secret that was still being protected a century later. He began coding, not to release the documents, but to create a failsafe, a dead man's switch that would release everything if something happened to any of them. It was risky, but it was the only insurance he could think of. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy calm. True to Rothschild's word, their lives had indeed become remarkably comfortable. Marcus received a call from a prominent venture capital firm expressing interest in funding his startup with a staggering $10 million investment. Jessica was offered the chief curator position at the Seattle Art Museum with a salary that doubled her current income. Thomas's tenure was fast-tracked with unprecedented support from the university board. David's small construction company suddenly won a bid for a massive commercial project in South Lake Union. Even Sarah, who they had carefully kept in the dark about the full truth, mentioned that she'd been offered a prestigious position in the hospital's new cardiac unit. But comfort came with a price. They all felt the invisible chains, the constant awareness that they were being watched. Marcus detected sophisticated tracking software on all his devices, so elegantly coded that removing it would immediately alert whoever was monitoring him. Jessica noticed the same well-dressed man reading a newspaper in the museum cafe every day. Thomas found his office had been searched. Nothing disturbed enough to prove it, but small things out of place that only he would notice. David discovered a GPS tracker on his truck, professionally hidden in the undercarriage. They met weekly, maintaining the pretense of their game nights, but the joy was gone. The puzzle that had brought them together now sat incomplete on Marcus's table. He couldn't bring himself to finish it again or throw it away. They spoke in code, assuming every conversation was monitored, playing board games while their minds churned with the weight of their secret. It was Sarah who finally broke the stalemate. She arrived at Marcus's apartment on a Thursday night, her face drawn with exhaustion and something else, determination. "I know you're keeping something from me," she said without preamble. "Ever since that night with the puzzle, you've all been different, and these job offers we're all getting, this isn't coincidence. What happened in the underground?" They looked at each other, silently debating whether to tell her. Finally, Thomas made the decision for them, telling Sarah everything. Her face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally a cold fury. "So we're just going to let them get away with it?" she demanded. "The Carlyles died for nothing?" "We don't have a choice," David said. "They have the evidence, they have those confessions, and they've made it clear what happens if we resist." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline. "When I was in nursing school," she said quietly, "we studied the Tuskegee experiments. Doctors knowingly let people suffer and die from syphilis just to study the disease. For 40 years, medical professionals maintained that conspiracy of silence. You know what my professor said? Evil thrives when good people choose comfort over conscience. Her words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus finally spoke. I have the documents, everything. I've created a distribution system that could release it all simultaneously to dozens of news outlets worldwide. But Rothschild's people are monitoring everything. The moment I activate it, they'll know. Then we need a distraction, Jessica said suddenly, something that draws their attention away long enough for the upload to complete. Thomas leaned forward. What kind of distraction could possibly... He stopped, his eyes widening. The anniversary. This Saturday is the 100th anniversary of the Carlisle murders. There's going to be a historical commemoration at the Museum of History and Industry. The mayor will be there, city officials, and... He paused significantly. James Rothschild IV is giving a speech about his family's contribution to Seattle's development. That's in 3 days, David said. If we're going to do something, we need to plan it now. They spent the next 2 hours developing their plan. It was dangerous, likely to destroy everything they'd built in their lives, but the alternative, living forever with the weight of their silence, had become unbearable. Sarah would create a medical emergency at the commemoration that would require evacuation, giving Marcus a window to upload everything while security was distracted. Jessica would use her museum credentials to ensure they had access to the event. Thomas would prepare a historical presentation that would provide context for when the documents were released. David would handle the physical logistics, using his construction knowledge to identify escape routes if things went wrong. Saturday arrived grey and drizzly, typical Seattle February weather. The Museum of History and Industry was packed with Seattle's elite, all gathered to commemorate a tragedy while unknowingly celebrating the descendants of the murderers. Rothschild stood at the podium, his speech about civic duty and historical preservation dripping with irony that only 5 people in the room could appreciate. Sarah had positioned herself near the catering table, a small vial concealed in her hand. The substance would cause severe but ultimately harmless food poisoning symptoms in anyone who consumed the champagne. It was a betrayal of her medical oath that tormented her, but she reasoned that temporary illness was a small price for justice that was a century overdue. As Rothschild reached the climax of his speech, praising his great-grandfather's vision for Seattle, Sarah acted. Within minutes, several prominent guests began showing signs of distress. The museum's security shifted into emergency mode, EMTs were called, and in the chaos that followed, Marcus sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks away and initiated the upload. The documents flooded the internet like a digital tsunami. The Seattle Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. Every major news outlet simultaneously received the cache of evidence. Social media exploded as the photographs and documents went viral. Carlisle Truth began trending worldwide within minutes. But Rothschild was faster than they'd anticipated. Even as the emergency unfolded at the museum, his security team traced the upload to Marcus. David, who had been watching the coffee shop, saw the black SUVs converging and called Marcus. "Get out, now!" Marcus ran, but he didn't get far. They caught him 3 blocks away, forcing him into a van. But it was too late. The documents were out, the truth unleashed after a century of silence. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus was arrested on charges of cyber-terrorism and theft of historical artifacts. Jessica, Thomas, and David were arrested as co-conspirators. Sarah was charged with assault for the poisoning incident. The confessions they'd signed were released to the FBI, painting them as criminals who had broken into the Seattle underground to steal valuable historical documents. But something unexpected happened. The public, seeing the evidence of the Carlisle murders and the century-long cover-up, refused to accept the official narrative. Protests erupted outside the courthouse. The hashtag #Justice for Carlisle competed with #Free the Seattle Five. Independent journalists dug deeper, finding connections between the 1920s corruption and current city politics. 3 Seattle City Council members resigned when their connections to Rothschild Industries were exposed. The trial became a sensation. Despite the prosecution's best efforts, the defense successfully argued that the Friends were whistleblowers, exposing a historical injustice. The jury, composed of Seattle citizens who had watched their city's history being rewritten in real time, took only 3 hours to return a verdict of not guilty on all charges. James Rothschild IV was arrested 2 weeks later on charges of extortion, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. The FBI investigation revealed a network of corruption that stretched back decades, with the Rothschild family at its center. The company's assets were frozen, their real estate empire crumbling as investors fled. 6 months later, the 5 friends stood in the Lakeview Cemetery, where the Carlyle family had been buried a century ago. The city had installed a new memorial, acknowledging the truth of their murders and honoring their sacrifice. Thomas had been instrumental in ensuring the historical record was corrected. Jessica had curated a special exhibition at the museum about the case. Marcus's startup had become successful on its own merits, free from tainted money. David's construction company was thriving with legitimate contracts. Sarah had become an advocate for medical ethics, using their story as an example of choosing conscience over comfort. As they stood before the memorial, Sarah read the inscription aloud, "Truth, like murder, will out, in memory of the Carlyle family, whose quest for justice could not be silenced, even by death." The wooden puzzle that had started it all was donated to the Museum of History and Industry, where it remains on permanent display. Visitors can see it, but not touch it. A reminder that some puzzles, once solved, change everything. Next to it, a placard tells the story of 5 friends who chose truth over comfort, justice over security, and proved that even century-old secrets can't stay buried forever. As they walked away from the cemetery, Marcus received a text from an unknown number. For a moment they all tensed, remembering another text that had started this journey. But this one simply read, "Thank you, a descendant of William Carlyle." The rain had stopped, and for the first time in months, the sun broke through the Seattle clouds, casting long shadows across the city that had been built on secrets but could perhaps be rebuilt on truth.